So Goldstein and Peepaus have been talking with us about this idea of the collective action problem that's sort of at the core of international politics. And that kind of dovetails with this concept of public goods. And there's a little bit of divergence, but there's quite a bit of overlap. And so I think it's worth sort of building the foundation about what are public goods, what do we mean when we say public goods, and what are some of the variations in kind of how public goods can be provided and exist. And so when we're thinking about a public good, we're not thinking about something that's good as in we like it. We're thinking about something that's like a good as in like a thing, although oftentimes public goods are a little bit intangible. Oftentimes they are desirable, right? They are good things to have, but there can also be things that are bad. Sometimes we call those public bads, but that's misunderstanding sort of what the word good is. Essentially what we're talking about is a class of things, goods, outcomes that benefit, hopefully, everyone, but end up being really difficult to provide. It's very difficult to sort of package them. It's very difficult to sell them, and therefore markets really struggle to be able to provide them. Oftentimes governments will step in and provide these sorts of things like security or the rule of law, clean air, research, art. Again, things that are kind of difficult to package, but potentially we want to have in a society. We typically don't go out of our way to create public bads, things that we don't want. But if we are trying to create these things, they're oftentimes underproduced by the markets because you can't sell them in the way that you can sell like a TV or a loaf of bread. And in an anarchic environment where we don't have a government to provide those public goods through taxation and coercion and sort of organizing resources, it gets particularly difficult to provide public goods. And so we'll have another conversation later on talking about kind of how we go about providing public goods. But for right now, I want to kind of like nail down like what exactly is it that we mean when we say a public good. So public goods have essentially four properties. Two of them relate to sort of the availability of public goods to everyone, sort of the publicness of them. And the other piece relates to sort of how they're unlimited and that we don't run out of them. And so one of the properties related to how they're available to everyone is this idea of jointness in supply, right? That if you make a public good available to one person, it could in theory be available to everybody else at essentially no extra cost to sort of provide it to everyone. So if I create an artwork and I post up on the internet, once I've done the work to create that artwork and it's up on the internet, anybody can grab that and they can use it, and the cost of copying it to a disk or saving it to the cloud is negligible. And so essentially once it's there, it's available for everybody. So that's one property that public goods must have to be pure public goods or true public goods. Another piece is this idea of non-excludability, that once I create a thing, once it's out there, it's very difficult to prevent others from consuming it once it's there, right? So there's ways to protect artwork or digital copyright kind of mechanisms that might not fit with this idea of non-excludability. Clean air is really hard to prevent people from consuming, right? Once you've gone through the effort of, getting, filters on smokestacks or whatever, pollution control efforts you have, everybody's able to breathe that air, and it's really hard to sort of charge people for each breath that they take, and only, allow clean air to be consumed by people who've paid for that privilege, right? So there's that idea of non-excludability. Not every public good, well, every pure public good has that. Many things that have sort of a publicness piece still can be excludable. Parks, for example, we can, put fences around and charge admission. Okay, so once you provide them, they're unlimited. So they have jointness in consumption, which means that the quality of the good is not diminished the more people that are using it, right? So I don't get upset because somebody else is using the rule of law. They can use the rule of law all they want. The rule of law is still just as good a thing for me, regardless of whether 10 people are enjoying it at a particular moment or a million, right? So there's not a sense of the quality of the thing is eroded. And then there's non-rivalness, that my benefits are not reduced by others benefiting from this thing. I'm sorry, I got those switched around. Jointness and consumption is the availability is not reduced. Non-rivalness is the quality. My benefit is not reduced. So Rule of law, I can consume all I want. Non-rivalness, you can consume all you want. Non-rivalness. Joint consumption is we can consume it all at the same time. That it's not like we're checking a book out from the library and that book, once it's checked out, isn't available. There's an infinite number of copies. It's a digital book you can check out from the library. Once it's available, we can all use it potentially at the same time. So true public goods, pure public goods, have all four of these different properties. They're kind of nifty. They're also really specific. And so a lot of the things that we think about or talk about as public goods maybe don't fit perfectly into that public goods framework. And so there's a whole class of things that we might call near public goods. And this is not a comprehensive piece. We'll be talking about a fourth kind of near public good a little bit later on when we talk about environmental management, where you can have a resource that can run out and you have to manage the collectiveness of it. But for now, we'll talk about three different types of public good like things, right? So impure public goods have at least one or two, maybe even three, but not all four of these various different properties. And so there's lots of things where if you add more consumers, the value of a good diminishes, right? So we can potentially put a gate around a park or a fence around a park and a gate and charge admission and make it excludable. We can not do that and have anybody have access to a park. But a park when it's super crowded isn't quite as enjoyable as a park when you've got a little bit of extra space to move and you can picnic without people playing frisbee over the top of you. So the more people who are consuming that park at that particular moment, the quality of that experience might actually be diminished by overuse. And so because of that, we might consider that to be an impure public good. In other situations, we might think about that non-rivalness piece, that I can put a fence around it. Gym memberships oftentimes function as what we would call a club good. Once you're inside the gym, you can use any of the equipment you want. You can, the facilities are fully available, but in order to get in, you have to pay a membership, right? There's an excludability mechanism, but once you're in, everything's sort of shared in common. It's a public good. Club goods are a little bit easier to provide than pure public goods. They show up a lot in international politics as well, because we oftentimes think about alliances as club goods, that you gain a level of security by joining into an alliance. If you are in that alliance, you have that security, and everybody within the alliance benefits from it. But if you're not within the alliance, you've been excluded from that extra security that comes from that alliance. Okay, a final piece I like to flag is this idea of public externalities and private goods. So there are oftentimes things that happen in the production of a private good that we like, that have maybe publicly valuable implications. And so I'll give you the example of education, because people oftentimes talk about education as if it's a public good, and I really don't think it is. I think it's a private good with nice spin-off effects. And so let me sort of explain what I mean by that. If we go back to our list of sort of what needs to be included for something to be a pure public good, it has to have jointness in supply, right? If it's available to one person, it could be available to everyone at no extra cost. Well, I can tell you as somebody who teaches classes that there's an extra cost. Every extra student who comes in the classroom is more grading for me. We reach a point where we run out of seats. There is an extra cost for adding additional students in. Non-excludability, right? Is it possible to prevent people from consuming education? Well, yes. Universities are very good at charging admission. And if you don't pay your tuition, you don't get the benefits of the education. They ask you to leave the room when the lecture starts. So they're definitely excludable. There's definitely, not jointness in supply. When we think about jointness in consumption, right, when one person uses it, is it no longer available for other people? Well, yes. In every room in my building, there is a number on the wall that the fire marshal has put there and said, this is how many seats you can have. And once you reach that point, you can't have any more people. So one person, signing up decreases the number of spots available. And once we hit that limit, there's no more spots available. And then finally, non-rivalness, that your benefits are not reduced from others consuming that good simultaneously. And again, when we think about sort of the different experience you get in terms of, a lecture hall with, 300, 500, 1,000 students in it versus a small seminar of 10 to 15 students, it's a completely different experience in terms of your ability to build relationships, in terms of your ability to sort of have a dialogue and discuss and like explore ideas and actually like dig into things, and actually build a community. It's a different kind of experience. And so I would argue that education does have a rivalness element to it, that the more people who are sort of packed into that process is going to change the nature of that experience. So education is definitely not a public good, based on the classic definition. So why do we always talk about it as a public good? Well, it has these sort of things that spill over from it, right? So in the context of, public goods for elementary and middle school and high school education, providing those private goods broadly means that people who have the potential to become inventors or surgeons or brilliant artists or musicians or talented entrepreneurs, they have the opportunity to develop those skills, to build into those skills. And that then goes on to enrich society as a whole, right? New stuff invented and brilliant breakthroughs in art or in social organization. Those are potential benefits to everybody in society. The other nice thing that comes with universal education is I get to live in a world where I can assume basic things about everybody else. I can generally assume people can read, and so I can leave a note for the kid who mows my lawn and say, the cord for my electric lawnmower is in the shop, right? I can leave that, and I can be confident that person is going to be able to read it. I can be confident that people are going to be able to do basic arithmetic and make change, and just being able to live in a society where we all have sort of a common set of skills allows for us to use all those skills all the better. So I think that's the publicness of education, which is a private good, but has sort of these spillover effects. And that's I think what economists mean when they use this term externalities. There's this spillover that happens, this extra value, and that extra value can be public. Okay, so I've gone on way longer on public goods and their definitions than I probably should have. I did a research project on this a number of years ago and dug into like the whole 80-year history of research on public goods and tried to summarize and organize it. And so you're we'll say benefiting from that experience with my detailed rendering of public goods and all their permutations, but it is a really important concept in the social sciences and a really important concept for this course, and so I wanted to sort of make sure we were all on the same page and using that concept appropriately and correctly.